Well, this is the nugget I'm going to give all of your listeners. Don't freaking stop there. Do not stop. While on paper, it's really hard to say, like, gap selling is the current state and the future state. And this asshat today put out a big post about it and is trying to get thousands of users, download his crap about gap selling and RIP. And it's just like, well, this is the current state and this is the future state and you sell to the gap. I'm like, it's more nuanced than that. Because somebody has an $8 million or a $10 million revenue gap, why does that freaking matter? Does it matter? What are the impacts to the organization if they miss it? I just asked on a call today, like, you've secured $300,000 in a year. Your goal is $2 million. Yikes. $1.7 million by the end of this year. What is going to happen? What decisions are you going to have to make in the business?
We're all part of this whole money game. This all.
Welcome back to another episode of Beers and Business. I'm Abe Dearmer, CEO of AppSembler.
Thanks for the countdown there, Abe. And I'm Andrew, CEO of Teamgate CRM.
Did you want me to verbally count down for you, Andrew?
Mate, I wasn't even looking. I was opening a beer at 6 a.m. in the morning.
So today we've got a special guest that's joining us. It's Celeste, and she's joining us as a certified gap selling trainer. We've talked a lot about gap selling on the podcast, so finally we have someone on to give us the actual professional advice on gap selling, as opposed to Andrew and I just rambling after reading the book. So we've got Celeste on, and comes from a big background in hospitality and sales, and been gap selling now for about a year and a half. Is that right?
Yeah.
I'm
happy to. I think we'll dive into that. Like, what the heck happened that made you join Keenan's crazy crew?
Yeah, absolutely. Keenan, as I was saying just before we started recording, and Andrew missed the countdown. He's a ball of energy that comes through. From anyone who's seen his videos, you'll understand. But let's kick it off with the beer reviews. And Celeste, we did warn you that we'd be drinking. It's 6 a.m. for Andrew and I, but that doesn't stop us. We've got to give the people what they want. So
we've got kids. We need this.
So I've got two today. So I got the Sandy Beach, and I've also got Nosy Bob. So, Celeste, these actually come with a pretty cool backstory. This is a local brewery, one of the towns I grew up in, a town that's probably about 30 minutes away from me. So the brewery is Devil's Hollow, which is really cool. It's all owned by women. They travelled through South Africa and they decided that they wanted to come back and start a brewery. So I'm going to read through both of these because last time I drank the other beer but didn't give an announcement of what it is, right? So the first one here is called Sandy Beach, and it's got a little fish on it. My light's messing that up. But named after one of Dubbo's favourite spots along the mighty Macquarie, whilst there is sand, you'd really call it a beach. Sandy Beach is our nod to our river and all the years of fun that we have had on it. Don't let the easy drinking fool you. At 6 ABV Belgian blonde, it comes with a nice kick. So Sandy Beach, it's funny, there's a spot along the river which has a lot of sand. And so the joke was when people would come visit Dubbo, you'd tell people to come visit Dubbo, you'd tell them to head down to the beach, and they'd go down there and it's just a river. So that was always funny. This one here is pretty interesting though, Nosy Bob. So I've had a few interesting ones throughout history, but this is a red ale. And the story is the ugly fella on the label is none other than Robert Nosy Bob Howard, the New South Wales state hangman who presided over 7 hangings at Old Dubbo Jail in the late 1800s. Nosy Bob lost his nose in Sydney in the 1870s when the horse pulling the handsome cab he was driving kicked it off. So a bit of a background story for Nosy Bob there, who lost his nose when a horse kicked it off, of all things. There you go. I'm going to crack into the Sandy Beach first up. And also I get to go through 2 reviews because Andrew's got a repeat beer from last week.
Thanks, mate.
Because he's a disappointed.
Oh, you've repeated multiple beers. This is the first for me.
All right. Oh, look at that. The Belgian blonde. There you go.
Suggested that I was going to be exiled from this because I don't like beer.
No.
It's okay. It's okay. Savan didn't like beer.
We had Savan last time. He's a
I don't get it. I don't get the flavor profiles. It's just like it's weird to me. My husband loves beer. I'll try it, nice. But
we do call American beer in Australia canoe water because it tastes like water compared to our beer. So maybe you're just drinking the wrong beer.
I will say craft beer in the US has changed that a little bit. Like your traditional Bud Lights and things like Coors and stuff like that are all canoe beers, but your craft beers starting to come along pretty nicely.
All right, I won't discount it. I've had a couple sips of like apricot-ish type beers, but I'm not going to discount it. But no, I usually don't drink a lot of alcohol either because it has a lot of carbohydrates in it.
It does.
And when I count my macros every day, I'm not willing to sacrifice 25 to 40 carbs on a drink if I can eat it.
See, my mother-in-law's the opposite.
Only beers I have is
she drinks wine for a full day's calorie intake usually.
That's the old like woman's weekly diet from like the 80s or 70s or something like that. It's like the white wine diet. Have a glass of white wine, 2 eggs for breakfast, repeat for lunch and dinner.
Right, there's all your carbs right there.
That's all you need to get through life, right? I guess the wine sort of makes up for the lack of food, right?
It's still, one glass of wine is like 37 grams carbs. So if you only eat 150 grams of carbs a day, although I probably will have a drink tonight. We're going out to a dinner, as my daughter calls it. Going out to dinner?
No, it's good. I usually just drink straight gin or wine. So straight gin is, I love it. It's great.
You just go outside and pick up some pine needles.
Pine needles.
Yeah, it's what gin tastes like. Pine needles.
I haven't tasted a pine needle, so I can't really comment on that.
Smell them, and it's exactly the taste of gin.
Oh, there you go. All right. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about macros and the calorie intake from alcohol. No, we're gonna go through our weekly wrap up.
Look as fit as you can. I'm almost 45. I'll be 45 next month. Fit at 45. There
you go. Yeah, we're both youngins.
It's this beer.
All right, so segment 1, we're going to go through our weekly wrap up. Celeste has been nice enough to throw in a quote and also a learning of the week, which is great. And then we're going to dive straight into gap selling and hear a bit more about it. Celeste's journey into how she got into gap selling and being a certified trainer and everything that comes after it. But let's kick off with our learning of the week. Andrew, what do you got?
Yeah, so obviously I forgot to get some new beers, so I'm drinking some of the old beers that I've already reviewed. But my learning of the week is that routine can be double-edged. So obviously we've done an episode on habits and building habits and how good it can be. But I think if you become comfortable as well, or just essentially turn the light switch off and just become a zombie marching forward, going through your routine day after day, you can really miss a lot of opportunity for things like testing and things like trying new things. So yeah, I think at stages through the year and recently I've become very comfortable in my routine. Whereas, in the current economy, I think you need to get uncomfortable. You need to go and test things and try new markets and try new tests, new experiments, and see what works. So that's the learning of the week for me.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing for people, is that they think they're moving the needle when really they're just like, why are you doing
just
that?
Ticking a box. You're just ticking a box.
I always do it. And it's like
blogging, right?
What's the end
state? If you're going to blog, just to blog, okay, cool, you've done a blog, you've ticked the box, your task for the week. But if it's not research blogs or on keywords that are actually going to generate some sort of business or interest,
to keep it on trend, right? So unless you probably see like people say SDRs, you got to make 60 calls a day because that's that's the metric. But why?
That's your goal.
Like, we've always done it. It's a routine. Like, people have to do it. It's like, but they're not getting any results. Isn't this just madness that you're just repeating the same thing without seeing the results? All right. And my one is about, so I was talking to a small business owner the other day and they were looking to implement some change. And I just realized how much we get ourselves into a loop of, I need to make change, but I don't have time to implement the change. I just need to do the task that requires the change. And then you get in this big cycle of never actually implementing the change that needs to occur to save you the time, like setting up an automation or like automatic invoicing. But I've got an invoice backlog I need to get through before I start automating these invoices. And it's like, well, you're never going to get to that point if you don't break the cycle, is probably the key thing. And I just think is when you have limited resources, time is your greatest asset. It's the one thing that you can't just buy more of. And so you really need to look at how you're spending your time. And if there's something there that's really could be automated or could be outsourced and you just haven't had time to implement it, you just need to break the cycle and accept that maybe for a week it won't get done, with the end state being that it'll be more fluid as you move forward. So don't get yourself into a time-wasting loop that comes with it is probably the key learning that I took away from it.
What's interesting is you can actually apply gap selling to their example of we get stuck in the process, which is I don't have enough time. And we're totally have moved away from, well, what is happening in your life? Like we'll just call it the business case of your life or in your business. What are those impacts? So we get away from that time because we know the impact. So if I don't do this, here's the cost of inaction. Here's the cost of change. Here's the cost of same. So I've had to do that a couple of times myself. Again, just this week on a call with someone, they have massive millions of dollar miss. And at the end, they started in the time loop. How much time is this going to take? We don't have the time. We don't have 20% of the time.
We've got to be selling. We can't be doing the training.
Yeah.
It wasn't even selling. It was the operational side of the business. And Keenan was on that call and I had to like reel them into, okay, so time is the process. You're stuck in that. You just told me if you do not achieve this, if we don't build the pipeline, if we don't build this out, you're not going to make the $10 million mark. You're only at 6 million right now. Like, help me understand. So I think those loops we all get into, especially personally, but you can start to look at what is that costing? I'm sorry, I thought I turned my Slack off and got out of it.
Yeah.
Never escape Slack. Never escape Slack.
And do that little bit of an exercise to take a step back to say, okay, because you're not able to get those invoices, what happens to the business? Can you not take on a new client? Okay, how much is the client worth?
Yes, absolutely. That's it. I think it's something that people really struggle with is taking that step back and coming out of the forest through the trees moment, right?
Definitely. Well, my learning of the week isn't as profound as both of yours, but somebody said it early on this week, and all week I've been thinking about it. It is, don't be afraid to put yourself back in like the student's shoes, to become a student. And so often we're talking and not listening to others. And this week I've had a couple of opportunities to just sit and absorb someone who's further along the road than me and like actually listen to what they're doing.
Mm.
And that put me back in the student seat, which I haven't been for a while. But it's kind of like if you're practicing being in the student seat, you can actually catapult your growth and put yourself forward if you actually just take that time to be a student. So a student of learning, become a student as much as you can.
And I think that's something that people go through all the time, right? I'm constantly learning. That's why we subscribe to newsletters, because we want to learn. We have this thirst for knowledge. And it's why we read, books about people who have done it before us. It's why we read gap selling. It's why we go through and do those things, because we want to have that constant learning cycle. And I think if you're in the position where you stop becoming a student, you've stopped growing in life. And whether it's a student in your business field or personal life, there's always some way to maintain that student mentality across the board.
Yeah. But I think you're good at it, Abe. You and I'd say we're pretty good at it, but how many leaders out there are fucking terrible at it? Like, we're in a pretty good network.
I like it how you snuck in praise to yourself there, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I like you saw it this week. I had an idea for the business. I threw it in our Slack community. I said, I don't want you to, agree with me. I want you to just rip this idea apart. I want you to destroy it, because that's how you learn. You learn from other perspectives. But how many people in the military did we see that were just, we're the boss?
I know better.
We're the boss.
I know better.
Like, I'm not here to learn from you. And you see it in business as well. So, I think it's really, really applicable to leaders as well. Here we go. What's that?
Celeste, what are you drinking there? LaCroix.
Came home and delivered me a seltzer, already open too, as to not disturb
calories. How many carbs are in there?
The seltzers, that'd be like 0. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Beauty.
Just fancy water, killing the environment.
That's like the biggest brand in the States, isn't it, for seltzer? Was it LaCroix? LaCroix. Is that what they call it? Is that the fancy name for it?
It's a non-Australian name.
We buy.
You said lacrosse.
polar, bubbly, depends on what's on sale, and then we have our own dispenser.
What flavor you got there? What flavor is it?
This is a black raspberry.
There you go.
Sounds
That's
good.
pretty fancy.
It's better than American beer.
Ice cold.
I assume.
Yeah.
It's probably left. Yeah, it's probably further away from water than American beer. All right, let's jump into the quotes. So, because I really want to get into gap selling and have a good discussion around that. So, my quote of the week is, and mine's from Mark Roberg, and he was, Andrew, you hate this, but he was RevOps in HubSpot for a long period of time. I moved away from there now, though, and mainly just shares about how he's able to grow HubSpot to, where it roughly is at the moment, which is pretty cool. But it's no longer about interrupting, pitching, and closing. It's about listening, diagnosing, and prescribing. And so I think that's really interesting, where a lot of people, and we're probably all going to have sales style quotes here because we're talking about gap selling. But I think that's like a really key bit, is that back in the old day, you still get it now, where you get like the water salesmen's, get to yes type people, the car salesman, where it's like, oh, you want this baby? Why? It's got, X amount of horsepower, can, do this and that. And it's like, oh, yeah, but I just want to run around car for the city. It's like,
Pitch chat.
But you want a truck, right? So it's like pitch at you. You're not understanding what they actually want out of it. And I think that's like a big part of gap selling that comes into it. And I think it's like a real, come to Jesus moment for sales as a whole, is that people don't want to hear, like I had someone come and give me a quote for solar panels on my house, and he would just not stop talking about the product. And I'm like, I don't care. Just tell, like, because they're like,
tell me what I'm going to say.
we usually do up a quote, at this point. And I'm like, okay, but we want to go through some things first. And he just had this rehearsed thing that went for like 15 minutes. And I'm like, mate, like, you're wasting so much time. Everyone really understands the concept of solar panels. Just tell me how much it's going to cost and I'll make a decision whether it's worth my time or not. And goes through like this whole spiel about all this other stuff. And I'm like, I just completely tuned out. I'm just looking at him blankly, just going like, this guy, hurry the hell up. So I think when you look at that, like, you got to be smart about how you sell things and trying to understand people's problems about, like, what's driving me to get solar panels? How much do I want to reduce my bill by? That determines, how big of a solar package, do I want blackout protection, those sorts of things that you need to understand and start asking those questions instead of just sitting there and going like, well, here's my pitch for 30 minutes. I hope you enjoy it.
It was well, you and I were on a sales pitch not too long ago with a big, I won't name them, a big video streaming company that just continued to try to, we're like, guys, we're not interested, like, get back on topic, like, stop trying to just sell us other stuff. We don't want it. Yeah. It does my head in. Good quote by someone from HubSpot. Maybe he should tell his reps to implement it. Nothing wrong with HubSpot. HubSpot's a good tool. I won't. All
right, Andrew, what do you got?
Yeah, so I thought I'd obviously get a quote from Keenan. It took me a while to find one that wasn't filled with expletives or cussing. So mine is no problem, no sale. And we'll probably get into the weeds of this as we go through the next segment when we talk about gap selling. But obviously it talks about, if there's no problem there that the business is trying to solve, you're probably not going to sell. And if you can't get them to realize that problem and commit to solving that problem with time or resources, then you're not going to close them. So that's mine.
Mine is not sales related, but totally appropriate for sales and comes from my father. I say it to myself all the time. You'll pass out before you die. And what he means by it is like,
I just love it. You quoting your father. That's great.
My dad is awesome. Like, he's published. He runs a $10 million medical multiple practices. Humble man. Lived in Africa for 3 years. Like, I could listen to him chat and talk. Actually, I did 2 podcast episodes with him just so I could have it for like later on.
Yeah, how cool is that? Yeah.
You're going to pass out before you die. So oftentimes we think things are like so hard. And it's like, you got to get through it and like, it'll be okay afterwards. Kind of like this book, The Dip, if you've ever read it.
Yeah, Seth Godin. Yeah.
Like a super tiny book, but like everybody gives up when it gets really hard. When it's like just all of it's going to.
It's like the old picture of the person who's digging for gold or for the diamond, right? And they stop just before and it's like, if he just kept going, you would have had it.
So I carry that mentality. Gap selling has been the hardest. I don't know if it's because I'm about to turn 45 as well. I have a 5-year-old. Like, this has been the toughest journey that I've been on. And I tell myself, like you'll pass out before you pass. Like you just keep going. I just keep going. Like something pushes me through to doing it because I know that there are companies that truly want to do the work and make change versus getting bailed out or sticking with the status quo. So just remember that.
We have a lot of business owners that listen to the podcast, and I think that is like super relevant to them is you'll pass out before you die. And I think it's crazy that, you know, when things get tough, you just got to knuckle up and get the work done and just trust in, you know, as much as Andrew said, don't, you know, breaking the process is good, but like trust in your vision, where you're going and the process that you're following to get to that point.
And I think it's a little bit different being on the side of working for yourself, being an entrepreneur, being a business owner versus the employee mindset. Right? I had such a, not a different mindset, but a different mindset of like giving up easier when I was an employee because I had a fail safe of like, well, I can get back to it tomorrow. Like I'm still getting a paycheck. Whereas now, like it's on me. If I don't do the work, I'm not going to get the results. Like it's on me to drive it. So it's been an interesting shift from building.
So I guess for our non-US listeners, a W-2 is like an employment contract, right?
Yes. So it's when you receive a steady paycheck from an organization on a bi-weekly or monthly basis. So we call it being a W-2 employee. That's the form you get at the end of the year that show how much you pay in taxes and how much you've earned. So a non-W-2, if I'm not selling it, it's not coming in.
It's not happening. Yeah.
It's like
exactly.
Like salaried versus contract, I guess, in Australia. Similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, similar sort of thing. And actually, I should have asked this before because I'm putting you on the spot. But what are the awards in the background, those big clear plaques?
So right here, I won Director of Sales of the Year.
Oh, nice.
So I went a nice trip to Hawaii where I met a bunch of metrics and my husband and we got engaged there, actually.
Oh, cool. So you got double the treat, right? Yeah, 2 awards.
This is like for meeting some metrics, first place, 40 under 40. 40 under 40 award from a business journal, and like manager of the year, manager of the quarter, whatever.
No big deal, you know. Yeah.
That cup behind you that you can see, Celeste. That's sports person of the year that Abe and I were speaking about last week. Pretty rare.
What about the swords?
I had to pay off so many people to allow him to win Sportsman of the Year.
Dominated.
In what sport?
All of them.
All.
Rugby, generally rugby, which is like a Australian version of
this cup here is best and fairest for first grade. There you go.
Yes, Rugby Town is big here in Denver.
It is. I've been to Denver for rugby.
Oh, okay. So my husband's hotel
played the Glendale Raptors.
My husband's hotel is across the street from Rugby Town, so they often host teams.
I imagine if the hotel walls could speak. That's enough about that. Let's get into gap selling, eh?
Let's just caveat it, Celeste, before we jump in. Abe would refer to himself as a gap selling wizard, expert.
Ooh.
So just be prepared there to have some.
It's a stitch up.
Robin will tell you the last webinar we did about gap selling. Abe had a lot of input. So I'm probably just going to sit here and admire the debate. But as we jump into gap selling, obviously Abe and I are familiar with it. We love it. It's one of our processes really when we hire sales reps. Is the first thing we do is we get them to go through the online gap selling course, and we order them a copy of the book. So, but for the listeners who are in Australia, I'd say we don't have as much exposure. What is gap selling, and why is it important to sales?
So gap selling is based on the philosophy of change management, the psychology of change management, in that within every sale, a change has to occur from your current state to your desired future state. And as a seller, we have to equip ourselves with understanding what that gap is that our buyer is facing in order to take them through that change management process. So in a nutshell, it is the gap between the current state and the desired future state. Lots of nuances throughout that. It is a sales methodology that is rooted in the buyer. So it is not seller-centric. It is buyer-centric sales methodology. And we look at the total sales organization. So from the skills development layer, opportunity management layer, up through forecast management layer, and how those all have to tie together. So that's what it is. Founded by little do people know his name is Jim Keenan. He goes by Keenan. That's his last name.
I love it. I love it. I remember talking to him and we're chatting to him. He's like, my first name's actually Jim. And it said, but do you know how many Jims there are in the world? He's like, no one gives a shit about Jim. So I just called it Keenan.
Yeah. So we're up there, we go toe to toe with Sandler and Challenger, force management, value selling, but not Medic. Medic is not a sales methodology. Let's just go ahead and squash that right now. But Medic does layer in nicely as it relates to forecast management, opportunity management. We have a whole ebook on gap selling meets med pick.
Yeah. And I think it's an important thing to look at when you look at gap selling as a whole, is that it's the one thing I really loved about gap selling is the practical elements that are contained within the book and in the training, as opposed to you get these other, sales. I don't know. It's sort of, is it really a sales methodology or is it like a sales practical handbook is what I see a lot about gap selling because whether it's, I definitely don't think it's a process because you get a lot of that in other books, and the practicality that comes with gap selling is amazing. And the reason that we get you to define it first off the bat is that we got in trouble in our earlier podcasts because you'd be there like talking about some random subject and everyone's like, yeah,
SEO.
I love what you're saying and it all sounds really good, but what the hell are you talking about? And so we'd be like, okay, so now we've made it a thing where we have to define what we're talking about.
And
as the first thing
is a lot of sellers have a hard time with gap selling because they're like, well, where's the checklist? Where are the boxes?
Yeah.
Where is, if I say this and they say this, then this.
For a discovery call, what's my pitch? How do I say it?
That does not exist. And for a lot of people, myself included, type A, it is difficult to exist in this space of, I'm going to take it as it comes and in the moment, kind of do this tango with the buyer of responding to what they're saying and feel comfortable doing it because I've had a lot of practice. So I think people will say like, well, gap selling is so hard and we can get into all that, but we don't believe in checklists. We can't tell you. The only thing we can do is arm you with the problems that you solve, which for 99.9% of people,
they don't know.
It ain't going to be the problems you think you solve, which is time, efficiency, and productivity, like every single website says. Those are problems that people buy from. You just heard Abe talk about it in his quote about the time. Like, people suffer with poor time management and lack of productivity and wasted money and all that all the time. They don't change.
No, absolutely not. So I think for me, you see a lot of people struggle with it. People who aren't free thinking. And that's why as Andrew said, we did a thing on hiring, but when we're talking about hiring is we actually run practical activities to people and we like to see how they free flow through things as opposed to having like a script prepared and things like that. So doing a mock sales call and seeing how they take things and where they go on the free flowing nature of it. Because if you can't hold a conversation and listen, come up with a response on the spot, then you're not going to be able to gap sell. And I think that's like a real thing, is that a lot of salespeople get caught out because they can't do that. And I remember the reason how I came across gap selling was I actually it was probably like 6 months worth of training with Keenan at a previous company I was at. And we'd have weekly calls with Keenan. And there was this one sales rep that had like a really good background in the space, but he just couldn't gap sell. Just couldn't think on the fly, come up with responses, couldn't get to the business problem. Was almost like he was, handicapped by his experience in the space. And you just see it, and I see it now, is that there's certain salespeople that just aren't going to be able to do it because it's a skill that takes time to develop, and some people I don't think can ever develop it. That's my opinion on it anyway.
It takes a lot of soft skills. It takes a lot of like active listening, interpreting people's body language, interpreting how they say things. I struggled with it. I still struggle with it at times. If you haven't done it for a while, like if you step into the CEO role and you're not doing sales,
it is not like riding a bike.
Jumping back in, you're like, this is tough.
You listen to your recording and you're like, I'm an idiot.
Yeah, I don't want to share this call with the team to review, but yeah, we generally mention, when we went through the hiring process for our US sales reps, we mentioned that we do gap selling, and we gave them time and gave them a free trial of the product and said, come back and do a discovery call. And
Awesome.
some of them came back and did gap selling, and that was who got the job essentially, because they were just more adaptive, and they went and learnt the system, and they took that next step to actually uncover problems that we had, because we scripted out some problems that we would tell them we had if they got to the point of asking those questions. So gap selling is really effective.
And I love that. And I think you hit the nail on the head there of if you're in sales leadership, so that's who I sell into mostly. Who I would
so
love
you sales
to
leaders, hit up Celeste.
If you're forcing your team get to some type of outcome from a discovery call, like you're handicapping them, you're putting handcuffs on them. You do not know until you're in the moment what a buyer is going to say. And to Andrew's point, like somebody says something, great gap sellers, you pick up on it. I was just on a call prior to this where I'm sweating because I had like 2 minutes to get here. And he said, our sales cycles are taking longer than they should, and they're not where we would like them to be. A non-gap seller hears that and moves on. A gap seller furiously is typing and listens to what they say and then says, tell me more about that. Tell me about the sales cycles. How long are they taking? You said they're not where you expect it. Where do you expect it to be? Now that conversation could take 10 minutes and go down a completely different path. But I know I solve for long sales cycles. I know that as a gap seller. That's what we solve for in gap selling. I can't prepare my team as a sales leader to anticipate how someone is going to respond to a question. So if you are framing your team you have to get to an outcome and be able to book a demo just from that one call that anything could come up and you get really curious about, like you're handicapping your team. And we're still in this place of, I talked to a team the other day. Our calls have to be 20 minutes and no longer, because I have to have 12 of them a week. And they have to be 12 calls. They have to be first calls. Okay.
I think the biggest speed bump for sellers when they start to do gap selling and things like discovery calls is, and it was for me as well, you feel like you're wasting their time initially. Like if you don't understand why you're doing it, you're like, these guys just want to see the platform, or they just want to like.
That's the biggest fallacy.
And it's also them as well. Like there is buyers out there that are like, I don't want to do a discovery. I just want to give me the price and go from there. For, companies like Teamgate, who, we're a smaller CRM where we have to solve a problem. Like we actually have to be a good fit. And if we're not, go and talk. Like my sales reps and Abe knows this, they get told, send them somewhere else. Like if you know that they're a good fit for HubSpot, send them to HubSpot, because 2 months down the line,
you're just going to waste your time with an unhappy customer.
Anyway. So it's going to spend more time and resources trying to keep.
That I hate to use the term upfront contract because it's not really what's happening, but it's like setting the stage for what's going to happen. I did it just on this call that I had that went over 15 minutes today, where I realized they found gap selling in a Google search. Yay for our SEO, right? And this happens all the time. People don't know what it is. They stumble across it. It is my job to do this like dance of, I'm going to give a little bit of education, but I'm also going to share with them why I'm freaking asking these questions. Because they're more bought into, you're asking because you truly want to help me, whether we do business together or not. So sellers, when you're practicing gap selling and you feel like, I'm trying to ask them getting to problem centricity, and I want to know the problems, like just tell them, I may ask you some questions that are not going to be like other discovery calls. And the reason is I truly want to understand if I can help you, whether we should do business together or not. Like I want you to leave this call having a diagnosis of what's going on. And most buyers are like, thank you. You're going to have a discussion with me. You're not just going to tell me about your product.
The one thing I hate, and I think we've been through this before, is like you get on a call and they're like, let me just share screen. And you're like, here comes the slide deck. And like, God damn it. Let me tell you about all these great stats.
My watch just said relax.
All right, so let's just backpedal a little bit. We know probably more about your amazing father than we do about you at the moment, Celeste. So let's hear a bit more about your background and how you got into gap selling yourself.
Absolutely. So caveat, I have a cold. We're going on 5 days, sweating, but I'm here.
She
I'm
made it.
Celeste. I'm about to be 45 years old and I own it. I have a 5-year-old about to enter kindergarten on Monday, and I have two stepchildren, one who just started college this week. So we got college all the way to kindergarten. I live in Denver. My background, I started in nonprofit, in membership. I got used to talking to people. And the interesting thing is, for anybody who's listening, I'm an extroverted introvert.
Mm,
I can
I get that.
put on my stage face. I can chat. I get passionate about things, but it's really uncomfortable. So being in membership, I had to talk with a lot of people, and I quickly got into the hospitality, managing an association of hotels, and realized by the time I'm 30, I want to be taken seriously as an adult. So I need to have a sales role. That was
I
the
would be
epiphany.
taken seriously as an adult.
That was the epiphany I had at 27 years old. I got a master's. I worked full time. I landed a director of sales job working at a hotel on property, managing 5 people. I'd never managed anybody. I'd never worked in a hotel. I'd never been in sales. And there I leaned on like a board of directors of my own people to help shape my sales career. But what helped me is kind of the tenet of gap selling, which is this insatiable curiosity. Like, why that? Tell me more about that. Why does it operate like that? What does this mean? I need to know more. And so I was a director of sales. I worked at various properties, and then I went to corporate. I was managing 19 hotels, $105 million portfolio, like 50 salespeople, and did the corporate do for a long time, traveled coast to coast, had a baby, and was riffed during COVID. I had done a lot of sales training, and a lot of my job was onboarding and recruiting sellers. And even back then, if they did not have a LinkedIn profile, I would not hire them, because in my mind, like, if you can't learn how to use LinkedIn, you cannot be a seller. And so fast forward 4 years, when I was let go, I had that fork in the road decision of, do I continue down the path that I've always known and get this salary, or do I go out on my own and figure out what I'm going to do? So I went out on my own. I took a lot of courses. At that time, I couldn't even tell you what a Facebook group was, what an email marketing campaign was. We didn't do that where I came from. So I learned a lot, started coaching people, selling coaching. I started selling into hospitality and winning deals to coach and teach teams.
That must have been pretty scary to start with, right? Where you're just like, all right, cool, here I go. Because we had, who was it? Mitch McMahon, I think, was said, like, you sort of just enter into this void. He's an electrician on Sunshine Coast, and he was working as an electrician. He wanted to start his own business. And he said, like, it was scary. Like, he's just entering into the void of unknown. Like, am I going to, imposter syndrome that comes along and things like that.
Totally.
Like, it must have been intense.
It was a rough 2 years. I mean, year 3 was rough. This year 4 is like starting to pick up steam. And as I started to sell into hospitality, I realized it's a dinosaur industry that is like so far behind any tech adoption that I potentially have to look at something else. And someone on LinkedIn said, hey, there are no female gap sellers as far as like training partners. So for those of you, I'll give you a quick, I'm in a licensing agreement with Keenan. So Keenan's pretty much at capacity as far as who he can coach, consult, and speaking engagements. So in order for him to grow his business, he has a licensing program. So there's only a couple of us. And I thought, okay, I'll read the book. And I put it off and I put it off and I put it off. And then I read the book and I had this oh shit moment of I'm gonna say the phrase, have been a BANT seller for 20 years. And I realized it. And I realized like the error of my ways of even Marriott.
The epiphany.
The products. It is about the features and the benefits of the product. Like that's what we sell to. the NOBF chart. So I reached out to the team and I was like, I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to see.
Who did you reach out to on the gap selling team?
So I reached out to Rachel, who headed up our partner program. and and it took a long time. I was like unsure. Do I
She's
do this?
Rachel May, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I had to interview with Keenan.
How's that?
Terrifying.
It's tough. And I sent him a video afterwards, like thanking him. And what's interesting is you go through a certification process. So you're a student. So you take a step back. Like I saved a lot of money in case of like doom and gloom. And doom and gloom had come. I lost my job. So I was betting on myself. I went through certification and then I'm fumbling around of like, now I got to build a website. I don't really know what I'm doing. Outbound, I don't know. And then all of a sudden I had this like epiphany, like at the beginning of this year of like, shit, no one's going to build this except you. You double down on LinkedIn, you double down on video, like start building a YouTube channel, like all of these things, outbounding, sequences, go, messages. And my discoveries have improved, but it's taken me like 6 months to where I'm like feeling pretty good on discovery. And I still get feedback from Keenan every single week during pipeline meeting about the blind spots and what I missed. So that in a nutshell to say it's been this evolution over time of, for a long period of time, not betting on myself. And I probably could be a lot further along in life because I held back as a female. You're told like, don't do this, be quiet. Oh, don't speak. This is how we always do. Until I was just like, you know what? I'm awesome. And I'm going for it.
You sound like Andrew now.
Hey, we got to.
So that's where we are present day. I'm in an interesting position in that I also act as one of Keenan's internal sellers. So all of his leads come to myself or Robin, and we act as his internal sales team. And then I source my own leads as well. So
yeah,
it's been a wild ride, but let me tell you, the more you get into gap selling and the more companies you talk with, you're like, it's so bad out there.
Sometimes you look at these things and you're like, how are you around? Like, how are you a thing?
Oh, man.
And like when we're selling, and Andrew's selling Teamgate and I'm selling Appsembler, and probably when you're selling gap selling is you look at them and you go, how are you a thing? Like you just nothing makes sense here.
Yeah. A multi-million-dollar company who has a 4% win rate. And they're like, we're just going to keep asking the SDRs to book more meetings. And like, the cost.
How do we get more leads so our 4% win rate increases our revenue, right?
Yeah. Yeah, crazy. And, like, I've got a call on Saturday, Abe, which I've told you about, $20 million company using Google Sheets.
Saturday's
yeah.
Oh, Friday US.
Friday US. I work US hours, so it's Saturday in Australia, but it's Friday.
Don't forget, we're ahead of time.
We're in the future.
You love Friday, Celeste. It's great.
I thought it was an Australian company. Okay,
US. No. We're US based. And then, I've got a current customer who's like hundreds of millions of dollars. They've got 6 companies in 6 different countries. And the CEO booked time with me after a training session to go through like CEO advice because he's got no goals, no OKRs on his employee. And I'm like, dude, what is going on? How are you at where you're at? Yeah, it's crazy what's out there and the success people are seeing. I
recently chatted with it. He was just curious, like, read the book. A lot of people read the book and then they're like, do it, DIY it, which we can talk about later. There's the whole DIY culture and I'm like, just DIYing a bad process. I don't know. But $22 million company. And as I'm doing discovery and we have 2 or 3 and I'm digging in, I'm like, okay, so you are running your business on an Excel spreadsheet. No, it's a $22 million. He's like,
it's common. It's common. They're my prospects.
It's way more common. Yeah, you got an intro.
They're my prospects. So let's stay away. I need them.
You're absolutely right. But let's switch gears. Let's talk about gap selling. Let's talk about the first thing is the core concepts of gap selling. So we talk about the current state, the future state, the gap. I really just want to get you to give your perspective on the current state, the future state, the gap, but also the pick. Because I think a pick is one thing that I found when I did a pick is that you think about it as like a sales component, but really it's the pick drives everything. You can use the pick in marketing, you can use it in success, you can use it, from engineering for like where you build the next bit of your product. Because you look at it and it's like, oh my God, this should be our H1, our homepage, because this is the problem we solve. We need to put that up there.
Pick problem identification chart for the listeners.
Yes.
Thanks, Abe.
Pick.
Yeah.
Yes. So
where do you want to start?
Let's start with the current state. So I want listeners to think about the current state as when you're talking to a buyer, it's all the like nitty gritty of what's happening. It's like the facts, how many employees they have, how is their team broken up, what tool are they currently using. So like there can be some process in there as well. What are they currently doing? If you need to know revenue, I want to know, what their revenue numbers are, what their attainment is. So current state is really that like facts that sometimes sellers gloss over. We only get a couple because we like to live in the future state. But it's necessary for you to get an understanding of what's going on in the business as it relates to like all the components that help to shape the business case. So for example, for me, I want to know, the makeup of the team, how many team members, what are they responsible for? And I'm not asking these questions one by one. Don't get me wrong here, listeners. The quota attainment, is it a disparate quota? So like is one person carrying the team, which is happening a lot? What is their revenue? What did it look like 6 months ago? What is it trending now? What's in their pipeline? All of these things that are in and around the problems I solve for, because that tells me a lot about what's going on. Like what is their training process? How do they onboard new members? So it's different case by case, but it is facts. It's not what I'm hypothesizing that they could have going on. It's like literal facts of what they're telling me. And all of that, PS, plug for a CRM, goes in your freaking CRM in the current state. Physical, literal.
Yeah. Yep. So the physical literal state. And I think it's really interesting for me because when you talk to a lot of companies, you ask questions like, and this is where I found it was a huge selling point for Teamgate around the analytics suite that's in there, is that out of the box, you get like conversion rates, you get, all these other metrics that are essential for sales. Like if a rep is outperforming all the other reps by 95%, you can easily see that, right? And a lot of people don't know the current state, which I find is a real challenge. This is where I find probably the most challenging part about gap selling is that you talk to people about the current state and they're just like, I don't know, especially in the sales realm when you're talking to them and sales leaders and you're like, oh, what's your current conversion rate? I couldn't tell you. Or what revenue do you want to obtain? And they're like, I don't know, maybe this amount would be nice.
And I think it's important to flex a little bit of, I don't want to say like challenging, but letting the buyer know why that information is important so that you can help them. Without it, you don't have a solid understanding, but also shaping it in why it's important for them to know it, right? You don't know. If someone tells me our win rate is 10%, I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know if that's where they want to be, where they should be.
For the industry, it could be fantastic, right?
Correct. Based on their pipeline, based on the size of deal, based on whoever set their revenue attainment, like it could be great. I have to get some more information. So if someone doesn't know it, I usually try to back up. This is what Keenan is really great at. And I'm like starting to flex that. It's like a storytelling as to why matters. Like, hey, curious, like, why don't you know? And they may say like, I don't have access to that information. Like you don't have access because you don't track it, or you don't have access because of like your job title. I actually met a sales leader who didn't have any access to any numbers. I ran from that, but she said it was above her. They didn't let her have any access to any of the numbers because it was like a privately held family company, yet she was to run the sales team.
That's like, that's, oh my God. That's crazy, isn't it?
If they know, then they'll know too much.
Yeah, mental. So the current state is like where they are now, their current situation. And, usually people don't go out and kick the tires on something unless they aren't happy about a component in their current state. And I think the gap selling side of that is like, all right, let's try and uncover what the actual issue is here. Is it conversion rate? Is it they've got to hit a certain revenue marker by a certain time to get the next round of funding? Do they need to have an increase in, let's just talk about if you're running like a marketing platform, an increase in the amount of leads because they want to build their sales funnel? What's the driving business component that's going to help them along is like the key bit. So gap selling, for instance, if you run, let's bring it back, way back down to if you run like an electrician, company, like let's just say Mitch's there, the business problem, does a lot of residential work, but on that side of the house, they might want new LEDs installed on the back porch. And it's like, oh, okay, well, why do you want that? You know, new LEDs. Oh, you know, it'll be nice to have some better lighting out there. It's like, okay, there's poor lighting. That's more of like a business impact that's happening. But the business problem might be is that they're hosting a work event at their house in 4 weeks' time, and it's going to be at night. And if the lighting's poor, it's going to be, you know, it's not going to be exactly what they want. And so the business problem, you know, sits higher than that as far as there's an urgency to getting it done, and they need that lighting to have that positive impact on people that are turning up.
Yeah, the business problems sit higher. Absolutely. And so I would put the caveat while we're going to talk about the pick, it is, you have to know the current state information that you're looking for as it relates to businesses only solve 3 to 4 business problems typically, as it relates to those 3 to 4 business problems. So if I'm talking to a company, I'm not going to ask them questions in their current state that relates to like how they hire or like what are they using applicant tracking software. Like that has nothing to do with the current, that is their current state, but it has nothing to do with the current state information that pertains to the business problems that I know I need to solve for. So once you know those business problems, you're looking for all the current state information that isn't around those business problems. And then as we move to future state, it is the desired physical literal in the future. So you can map it to it. So let's say they have 4 employees right now, but by end of this year, sellers, they want that to be 6. You know, 6 is the desired future state and 4 is what they currently have now. Those two like track to each other. So typically people will tell you that like, oh, right now my revenue's 2 million. By the end of this year, we want it to be 3. Okay. Current state, future state, those two map together. So it's the desired outcome. And sellers love to talk about future state because that's what our problem fixes. Like, oh, let me get you to this Narnia place where all of that.
But that's why people have slide decks, right? Because they're carefully crafted future states without understanding the current state. So it's like a broad wash, non-specific future state that they could potentially provide. Teasing the promised land, as Andy Raskin would call it, is really the biggest thing there. But one thing I'd like to touch on is that when you go through this discovery call and you finish the current state, there's times there where you're like, I actually can't help because you don't have problems that I can solve. And I think this is the real key bit about gap selling is, and goes back to Andrew's quote at the start, you know, no problem, no sale. If you get through the current state and you're like, well, I can't solve your problem because you want XYZ. I don't do that. So go and see, if you have a referral, like go and see someone else. This is the person I recommend. Or I simply can't help you. We're not going to continue the conversation. It's funny, right? People don't deal with rejection well in those states. And when you're like, I don't think we should move forward. And they're like, oh, hang on a minute. Whoa. Like I could find some way to, and you're like, no, like it's okay. It's like, it doesn't, it's just weird, right? Like if you tried to hard sell them, and sell them on something they didn't want, they'd be like, oh, no, I don't think this is a fit for us. We're not going to spend the money. But as soon as you're like, look, I don't think this is for you because we do X, Y, Z and you want A, B, C. And they'll be like, what do you mean? You can't kick me out of your funnel. And it's like,
where can I go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But is that something that you put in place?
Oh yeah. I have an example. November, December, was on a call. Someone wanted a speaker and it was actually local, which rarely happens here in Denver, to come in and do like sales kickoff for their team. So as they go through discovery, we're talking about their conversions. Good. They're meeting their revenue numbers. Good. Team's not discounting. Okay. Like I really only got one business problem left, which is sales cycle length. Also good. Like I'm not really finding a problem here. And then when I dig deeper about like their process and what they're doing, it's a whole entire BANT organization. So at that point I was like, listen, Linda, how I can help you. I actually think it's going to be like disruptive if I come in. Like while I don't really agree with BANT at all, it's working for you all. You're hitting your numbers. Like for us to come in and kind of be the anti-BANT, it's like a massive shift to your whole org and probably going to be like worse than if you continue the course. And they were totally like, you're not going to sell us? Like, you're saying you're not going to work with us?
You don't want to come speak?
Yeah.
That is true.
Yeah. And I think it's important, right? Because as Andrew said, you get someone who comes in and then you're not a fit, and it's like, well, no one's happy. They're a burden on support. They're a burden on, your business. And then on the other side, they're like, why did we buy this heap of junk? Let's move forward. All right.
Yeah,
we are rapidly running out of time.
So that
I just realized.
Really quickly. So Keenan did a study recently of 1,230 executive level buyers. So statistically sound survey, and 47% of respondents said that they have purchased the wrong product because the seller has not identified a problem. So they end up making a wrong purchase, which, this is why we're seeing 30% churn on the back end for a lot of companies that sell software as a service, because you didn't properly go through discovery. They probably shouldn't have bought in the first place, or you sold them the wrong thing.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And then future state.
Yeah.
Let's talk about future state. What's that?
So it's where they desire to be. So like let's say I'm 150 pounds currently. My desired future state is 140. So I know I'm 150 now. I want to get to 140. That is...
Stop drinking beer, Abe.
That's why I count those macros. But it's the same thing for our team. When we talk, we basically, when we're in the current state, we want to ask them, like, where would you like to be? Where do you need to be? What is the board number for the end of this year? What does that growth plan look like? Because sometimes you have to do the math. If they give you the number, freaking do the math yourself and then spit it back to them and say, is that correct? Like if they say 2-3% growth is where we need to be. And then you're like, okay, that's this. Is that right? So that is that future state. It just tracks to the current state. Most companies want to see growth. So there's going to be an increase in either headcount, revenue, adoption of services, adding more consultants, adding more, if you're an MSP, they want more, what are those called? It's like
billable hours, I think is
the lines, phone lines. I think they call them units or something. Whatever the context is, people are usually tracking to grow, decrease, and you want to figure out what that is. You know how to start building that gap. What is that gap in between?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the future state for me is super important to helping you understand how you're going to implement the solution that's required. So the current state is identifying the problem. The future state is then allowing you to step that next level forward. And I think when you look at the future state, sometimes you have to coach people along on this journey. And people are like, I just don't know. I know I have a problem and I know this is an issue. I don't know where I want to get at. And you start to develop it. And this is where I think gap selling becomes in as like a really big consultation and almost like, as you said, a conversation about it. Is that you're not just focused on, all right, well, let's sell A, B, and C. It's like, hey, here you go. Let's talk through where you want this future state to be and what you want it to look like.
Yeah, and sometimes people don't know that, or you can look at history. Okay, you said that you grew 20% year over year. Is it fair to say that will be the same desired metric for next year? Yeah, 20% is good. Okay, and then you're able to calculate how much that is. So I do think it's this guide, but also constantly reaffirming, like I'm asking so I can help get the bigger picture of what's going on and I can truly understand your organization. I would hate for you to purchase something that isn't going to fix your problem. So that's why I'm asking to understand. And if they don't have that information, then we have to have a different conversation of why it's so important that they go get that. But a lot of people, especially in sales, or if you're a business owner, kind of know where they want those metrics to go if they're not performing at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. And then when you look at it, the gap is just that area in between. And so, hey, we're at 10 million. We want to get to 20 million revenue. This is the gap. There's a $10 billion gap there. You've got a $10 million problem that you need to solve.
Well, this is the nugget I'm going to give all of your listeners. Don't freaking stop there. Do not stop. While on paper, it's really hard to say like gap selling is the current state and the future state. And this asshat today put out a big post about it and is trying to get thousands of users, download his crap about gap selling and RIP. And it's just like, well, this is the current state and this is the future state and you sell to the gap. I'm like, it's more nuanced than that. Because somebody has an $8 million or a $10 million revenue gap, Why does that freaking matter? Does it matter? What are the impacts to the organization if they miss it? I just asked on a call today, like, you've secured $300,000 in a year. Your goal is 2 million. Yikes. 1.7 million by the end of this year. What is going to happen? What decisions are you going to have to make in the business? Like, you want to find out. Are they going to have to reduce headcount? They're not paying out bonuses. Now they have to go raise more money. They're going to miss their seed round. They can't take on new clients. They've got to borrow money from their freaking dad. Like, I don't know what, but something, because within that gap and the impacts lies the motivation to change. And so I would venture to say, Andrew, it's not no problem, no gap. It is no impact, no gap. Because someone may have a problem, but if you can't find an impact, if it's not materialistically showing up and making a crunch in the business, it is very hard to get them to agree to buy something. If it's like, well, we can live with it. So
it's not that big of a deal.
That gap, Keenan is always on me, like, Celeste, go deeper. What does it mean? Okay, they're missing the revenue. What does it mean to the valuation? What's going to happen to the exit? Is the exit going to get delayed? Like, we got to peel back the layers here. It doesn't always have to be revenue. It could be time, resources, stock values going down, the cash flow. They have to dip into lines of credit. Like, it's so much to build this gap.
Yeah, like, and I think that's the key bit that people often get stuck up on, is they take the first thing that comes out and then they run with it, and then they end up creating this false narrative that they've created in their head that just doesn't match up with the real thing. And when I was doing some training with Keenan, I was like, it's almost like there's a pane of glass that sits behind your prospect's head, and they're there giving you these almost like bullshit answers, but they don't think they are. They just think that, like, they're giving you the information that you're asking for. Mm-hmm. But then you've just got to, like, smash through the glass, get to the back and reach out and find that information that is relevant to why they have come out and what they're looking for, right? And I think that's a real big thing that people don't focus on enough, is that they'll get like this nugget of information of like, yeah, we need to hit this revenue milestone, and be like, got them. Yep. There's no way they can turn back now. And then totally. They're like, oh, we're not going with you. Like, why? What happened? I thought we had everything. It's like, oh, because we need to do X, Y, Z, or it's not really that big of a problem. And it's like, so it's not a $2 million problem. It's like, oh, well, we're just going to go and do this and this, and it's no longer a problem for us.
You have to find out if it truly matters. And that goes back to like qualifying, right? Do they have a problem? Do they agree they have a problem? Are they willing to fix it? Are they willing to go on the journey with you to fix it? If not, you don't even have a freaking qualified opportunity. But yes, just because somebody has a revenue miss doesn't mean it's actually an impact to the organization. Just because they had to take a reduction in staff doesn't mean that it's impactful. Like, you have to figure out what bad shit is happening as a result of that, and then quantify that so you can start building your case, because you can fix that. But if it's this big, they're probably not going to buy it.
Yeah. Even if there is an impact, or if it's a $2 million problem, if your solution doesn't solve it,
yes,
you still don't have, like, it doesn't matter, right? So and that's where the problem identification chart comes really in handy, I think, for me is, and for the listeners, even if you don't do gap selling, I think Google problem identification chart. It's such a good exercise to go through with your team to actually understand your own internal business and what problems you solve. And then it feeds into everything. It's not just sales. It can go in your website copy, your marketing campaigns, your targeting, your ICP targeting, your segmentation.
Totally.
So,
and
yeah,
it
that's a massive
very
tool.
eye-opening. I have a seller of this team. I said, before I'm going to talk to you any further, like, I want you to do this exercise with your co-founders. Because typically whenever a team attempts the problem identification chart, if you're a seasoned sales leader and you sit back and listen, you're going to realize, oh shit, I hope I can square. Is that fine? Like, nope.
It's too late now anyway.
Multiple times.
Go about it.
I have 60 people on this team and we're sitting here with 200 problems. Not everybody is all over the place. Marketing is here. CS is here. C-suite. Sales is here. This is how we talk about our customers internally and externally. And no one is on the same page here. So it's a very eye-opening exercise, Now the nuances of whittling that down, most people will be like, well, we solve for productivity. Oh, we did it. That's our problem. And they're like, well, no one is taking our calls. No one's responding to emails. We can't build pipeline. And you're like, because you're talking about something nobody cares about.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Look, I'm conscious of time. We spend way too much time at the front here.
Sorry. I'm like,
but it's fine.
The
it's great.
little gap seller in me from a year and a half ago was so much different. Even Keenan sometimes is like, where did this personality come from? I'm like, the more I get into it, I'm just like fired up because I see it every day. I see it in the inboxes. Go look at your freaking inbox. If you want to realize,
oh, it's crap.
Oh, we have an issue. We were talking about product. Go look at your junk, look at your spam, open up. Every single person is going to say, hey, I have this product. This is how we helped XYZ company. This is what we do. Do you want to see a white paper? And you're like, oh, this is yucky. So don't have your teams do that. Focus on the business.
Well, that was my last question I was going to ask you is the 3 bits of advice that you can give to people who
doubt it.
Want to get into gap selling. And I think that's problem 1, right? Is like stand out in the crowd. Don't just sit there. We solve for company XYZ. Here's our white paper. Read our stuff, right? It's actually solve a problem, not just sell your product, is probably advice number 1. Have you got 2 more?
So you have to uniquely understand the business problems that you solve. If you don't, we have the problem identification chart that is free to download, and you can do the exercise for your team yourself. So that's number 1. 2, there's an extreme lack of coaching as it relates to any type of teams and the changing of behavior. I don't know why a lot of sales leaders don't want to have one-on-ones. They don't want to coach calls. They don't want to do any of that. But you cannot change behavior if you don't know what you're trying to change the behavior to. That's where the problem identification chart comes in. Hey, in discovery, do you notice when you said this? Do you notice when you said this? You went right to product. You did not find a problem. Let's back up. What problems are we looking for? Coaching them, actively coaching them and giving them feedback. So that's number 2. Be willing to do that. And number 3, curiosity around things that are undefined. When someone gives you something that's vague, practice this in your real life. Here's one if you have a spouse.
We're laughing, right? Because my feedback, and Andrew has got this before, is like, you're not curious enough.
I used to have a big sign behind my computer that said, be curious.
because Abe would constantly say, why did you not ask a question around that? Because you're not being curious enough. And every single sales rep that I've run coaching for is like, I know, I need to be more curious. And like, yes, you do.
But they have to know what that means in practice. So they have to hear it and see it. So this is where the curiosity comes in as far as undefined. And you can actually practice this in your real life. It's great for your spouse. They will love you, or your partner. I do it with my husband. Sure, that's fine. And I'm like, can you help me understand what sure means? Like, what do you mean by sure? Please explain it. And because of that practice of like, cool, I'll be there soon. And then I'm like, I'm triggered by all of these vagaries. And that's what helps in discovery. If you get triggered in your personal life, when someone gives you a vagary, soon, not enough, more, be there whenever. Like, okay, can you help me understand when that is? Is it like 3 o'clock? Is it 5 o'clock? Helping them to define things is going to help you become a better gap seller, because you're going to be triggered when someone gives you a vagary of, oh yeah, we didn't hit it this year. Sellers go on from that. Okay, they didn't hit it. What do you mean by didn't hit it? Oh, we were off. How far were you off? Oh, by a lot. What is a lot?
It's very like Chris Voss, right? And Never Split the Difference. When you look at that, it's like just being able to mirror and being like, you didn't hit the mark.
I hate that word. I hate that word, mirror. But it's like, they don't understand why you need it. So sometimes I have to frame that up to my husband as well. Like, hey, I need to know specifically when you're coming home, because I don't, if I'm making dinner, like I don't want it to be cold. He's like, oh, cool. Yeah, 7 o'clock. Great. Where I could just keep hounding him. Like I usually, if someone goes down that like a couple of vagaries, I usually take a step back and like frame it. Hey, this is why I'm asking, because you said you were here. I'm trying to figure out like how far off are you? Well, are we talking like this much? Or are we talking this much?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. This is really good, actually, because I feel like we had a lot of freewheel at the start, which is really good. And it sort of gave people an understanding. We talked about gap selling the entire time. So I think, although we like to come prepared, but we also like to be free-flowing. And I feel like your energy came across really well, Celeste, and about...
Pretty good person to interview. I just like roll with it.
Just need prep time to get the head done.
You and Andrew, like two peas in a pod, right?
No,
going.
I do not have like huge ego or self-esteem. I've actually struggled with depression my whole entire life. I'm having to talk to myself about how awesome I am and then like pretend and then tell myself so that I can like believe it.
Well, that's the difference between you and Andrew. Andrew just believes that he's the best.
You're awesome, Celeste.
I just know I'm awesome.
Don't let Abe bully you.
I have this cup up here that tells me I'm awesome.
Yeah.
But if people want to follow up with you, where can they find you?
Abe?
They can find me on LinkedIn, Celeste Berke Knisely. I have this budding YouTube channel that's about to blow up. It currently has 22 subscribers, Celeste Berke Sales. But I love video, so I share snippets of video. So I have 20 or 30 videos rolling out here shortly.
Hell yeah.
But I'm always open. Hit me up. I'll give you a resource. We actually have a huge resource library. You could just get like a PhD in sales from the Gap Selling website, salesgrowth.com. There is as many resources as you want. If you are listening and you are building a sales org or you're curious, we have something called the revenue speed model, which is basically like building out a go-to-market and sales team. It's a 150-point checklist. That's an awesome hidden gem of a resource.
Yeah, nice. That's good to go. And what we'll do is we'll link those down the bottom in the description. So people will be able to find you, get to the Sales Growth website and get that PhD in sales that we're talking about. But for us, you can find us at Beers and Business Pod. Like and subscribe across Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're all on there. Some good questions, topics, TikTok as well. Andrew's TikTok famous. So tell us what you want to see for future episodes.
I got 1,000 views. Pretty good.
That's my bullying, Celeste. It's very subtle. But yeah, weekly 10 a.m. Tuesday 10 a.m. is when the podcast is published. So get out there next Tuesday 10 a.m. Watch the next episode. And thank you, Celeste, for coming on today. Really appreciate it. It's great to hear about gap selling and, more importantly, story behind how you got into gap selling. So thank you so much for coming on today.
It's been a pleasure. You guys have been awesome to chat with and here to support and help you grow as well, however I can.
Awesome. Enjoy the zoo.
Cheers, guys.